Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the State Library. I'm Jeanette Wright, and I'd first like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land here at Kurilpa Point. We'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners past and present, and this is a practice we have learned from the local Indigenous people, and it's one we're very proud to continue. But I'd also particularly like to introduce and welcome our three speakers at this yLibrary forum today. Eli Neiburger, who's the Associate Director for IT and Production at the Ann Arbor District Library, and the author of a book called Gamers in the Library. And just as a side note on that, when I first heard that, I was reminded of an incident that back in the 1990s when I was working at the State Library in New South Wales, and I had this idea that perhaps we should partner with Nintendo or Sega at the time. But one of my colleagues is actually sitting in the audience, and she'll remember that there wasn't a very good reaction to the idea of having games in the library at the time. The other two speakers are Simon Groth, who's the director of IF Book Australia, and he's very well known here at the State Library and associated with the Queensland Writers Centre. And another person who's from the staff of the State Library, Jane Cowell, who's the director of Regional Access and Public Libraries at the State Library. So today we're here to discuss the question, why library? And I'd have to say that it took us some time to come up with a short name that we could use as a Twitter hashtag for this whole concept, because it's part of our visioning for the digital library, but we wanted to be able to consult with the wider community, and that meant not just the people who come into the building, but the whole community of public libraries and their communities throughout Queensland, but also internationally to engage with people who've got an interest in library and the future of libraries, and not just this library, but all libraries. And so we tried to think of a way to shorthand that, and we came up with yLibrary. And I happened to be in Singapore when we had come up with the branding, and it was sent to me, and I was sitting with a group of librarians at the IFLA conference, and these librarians were from Africa and the Middle East and Asia. And I said to them, what do you think this brand means? And they immediately said, oh, what's the future of the library? And what will we be doing in the future? And are we still valued? And I thought, yes, exactly, that's what we want. So we've gone ahead with yLibrary. So as part of our digital library project, this is helping us to form a vision of what we will be doing in the future so that we can plan and prepare for that. And part of the reason why this is important is that we think the library brand is a universally positive brand. People understand that the library is a good place. It's somewhere where you can go and share and learn and be yourself. And so we know that there's some core values in the idea of library, but what we want to do is try to tease out what that means in a practical sense. Because we don't want to become irrelevant. We don't want to become just the museum for the book, which is the way some people will think about the library. And we need to influence people outside the library world, and not just the library users, but people who fund us, both government and partners and industry. So we could ask the question, are libraries still relevant to Australians? Well, in some senses, we're getting information that more and more people are using libraries, and certainly we know that 46% of Australians are already public library members, and there aren't many institutions which could claim that kind of coverage. And we know here at the State Library of Queensland that last year we had more than 1.4 million visits on site, and more than 2 million visits online. And so those numbers indicate to me that we are still serving a role and that we have an increasing role in the community. So I think we have an exciting future, and I'm looking forward to hearing what the three speakers have to say today, but also how you question and respond to that. So I'd like to introduce today's facilitator, Paul Barclay, who's an ABC radio presenter and producer. So, thank you.
Thank you, Janet, and welcome to the State Library of Queensland this morning. I'm glad so many of you could take time off from your busy lives and come here for what promises to be a stimulating and quite possibly challenging glimpse into the future of the library. As Jeanette said, I'm Paul Barclay from ABC Radio National. I am the presenter of the Big Ideas program here in Brisbane, and you might also see me on ABC TV's Big Ideas as well, or here at the State Library, where I am quite a bit of the time actually, hosting events. I've been to the Brisbane Writers' Festival, which has been held here for donkey's years, moderating events. And I was thinking actually of my two favourite libraries in the world. This one is one of them, the Thoroughly Modern Library. And at the very other end of the spectrum, my other favourite library is the Bodleian in Oxford, the Temple of Books, perhaps the Museum of Books, as Jeanette was saying, a place where every single thing that is published in England is held. It's an incredible place and quite possibly a vast anachronism actually, which makes me feel rather sad, but if you're ever in the UK, I urge you to go and check it out, although you'll need to get someone with a student card to take you in because the general public are not admitted. There could scarcely be a better venue actually for a discussion about the thoroughly modern digital library than this place right here, where you walk in immediately and you see no books. The State Library of Queensland, I think, from a non-librarian's perspective, which is clearly what I am, has been at the forefront of change and epitomises the movement toward some sort of future for the library. Part of their digital library project, as you know, is about engaging with this question, why library? And that's why we're here today. We want to have a conversation with those who have an interest in libraries and publishing and books, those who work in these related fields. And this discussion's really about you. We really want you to engage in this discussion today. What should the library of the future be like? Who will it cater to? How will its role change? How does it remain a central part of the community? What are the possibilities and what are the threats? I'm no expert on this, but I am a patron of libraries, and I'll be moderating this morning's conversation, which is to say, really, that my role is to get you talking, asking questions, passing on your thoughts. You can all help to shape what the library of the future will be like, so don't just sit there. Be heard when the microphones are passed around. You can also tweet your responses to the presentations that you're about to hear, or your queries, or your follow-up questions, and the Twitter address is @SLQLD, and the hashtag is Y, that is the letter Y, library. So just switch your phones to silent and tweet away. We'd love to hear from you. Later in the morning, we'll read out some of those tweets. Before I go any further, can I just ask a question? I was pondering this last night as I was preparing for today's event. How many people in the audience have reasonably large book collections at home, full of books that you've read and are almost certain never to read again, but you just can't bear to part with them? Yeah, I thought so. We've got obviously a way to travel down the digital road. I'm the same, a house full of old media, records, CDs and books take up about half of the square meterage, I think, of my house. Okay, the way this morning will work is that we'll have three really interesting speakers giving a presentation on ideas and initiatives relevant to this topic of the changing library. We'll hear first of all from Simon Groth from If Book Australia at the Queensland Writers Centre, and he'll be speaking about the future of the book, the physical book, the dead tree book, and also the digital book, and perhaps how they relate or don't relate, and the myriad of possibilities and manifestations. In my field of journalism and broadcasting, the divide between the audience and the journalist has utterly broken down. We are no longer, and some people might not be very happy about this, but we as journalists are no longer the gatekeepers. And I suspect the library is heading down that road as well, if it hasn't already started its journey. The audience, the consumer, the patron is no longer content to sit back passively reading, listening or watching. They want to be creating, participating and responding, and they expect to be heard. So that line between consumer and creator has become very blurred indeed. And whatever discomfort you might have about that, it's irrelevant, because nothing is returning to the way it once was. Perhaps we'll hear a bit more about the parallels between journalism, where we're perhaps all witnessing actually the last days of the newspaper, and see if there's a parallel there with the book. Simon's presentation will go for about 20 minutes, after which I'll be facilitating a conversation with you and Simon. I may have a question or two, but really I'm going to leave the ball in your court. Annie and Christy are going to be here actually for the whole morning, and they're going to have some microphones that they'll pass around. This will be recorded for the State Library website, so just pause a minute until you get the microphone in your hand so that we can get a recording of your question, and we can put it up online. We'll have about 10 minutes or so of questions at that point. Then I'll introduce Jane Cowell. Jane is the Director, Regional Access and Public Libraries, whose presentation is entitled Does Digital Change the Library Model? And I've got a bit of a sense of what Jane will be talking about, because we had a chat some time ago when we were planning for this, and I reckon it'll be an eye-opening presentation for many of you. In a sense, libraries will continue to cater for the needs that we've always had and will continue to have. We will want and increasingly need access to content we're interested in, content that connects us together. In the past, that content was books, magazines, journals, reference materials in hard form. Now and into the future, that content will be in digital form. You can get it on your computer at home, so why bother coming to a place like this? That's obviously one of the big challenges. Jane will also tell us about Alice and what all this means for the library as a digital space. Jane's talk will last for about 15 minutes. Once again, we'll then take some more questions, then we'll pop out to the Queensland Terrace, continue our conversation informally, grab some morning tea, and at 11:10 we'll come back in here for our final presentation, Eli Neiburger on the inverted library. You might have seen some of Eli's stuff on YouTube. I was watching his presentation on YouTube last night, actually. Libraries Are Screwed, it's called, and really interesting, actually. Basically, if you can access much of the stuff that's here, as I said, why bother coming into the library? And if libraries know that, then obviously they need to be on the front foot at redefining a new future. So we'll talk about that. What are libraries best equipped to do in the modern era? What are they best equipped to produce? Eli is from the Ann Arbor District Library. He's an author, and he's at the forefront of employing new technology to enhance and change the library experience. I'll tell you more about Eli later. His presentation will go for half an hour, then we'll get all the speakers up on the stage here to have a final conversation, and we'll also get some Twitter responses from you, and we'll wrap it all up by 12:30. Okay, let's get the show on the road. Simon Groth is a writer and editor of fiction and non-fiction. His stories can go anywhere from tangled relationships and virtual writers to rock music and sleep disorders. His first two novels were shortlisted in the Queensland Premier's Literary Awards, and his short fiction has been published in Australia and in the US. He was co-editor with Sean Sennett of Off the Record, 25 Years of Music Street Press, published by UQP, co-author with Darren Groth of a young adult novel, Concentrate, which was shortlisted for the Text Prize. As director of If Book Australia at the Queensland Writers' Centre, Simon regularly writes on the future of the book. Please welcome Simon Groth.
Thanks, Paul. Lovely. So, I guess I need to open this presentation with a confession. This presentation is a copy. Actually, it's more a declaration than a confession because everything is a copy, and this is not even an exact copy, if there ever is such a thing. It's a remix of a bunch of ideas I've been writing and talking about for years. A mashup, maybe. It's involved cutting and pasting and smoothing out and, maybe a little bit of ironing. And, actual writing as well. Think of it as a copy of a copy of a copy. Juxtaposed ideas, distorted and transformed in the process into something new. I've been thinking about copying a lot lately, and specifically about how our notions of the copy have migrated from the physical world to the digital, and what this might mean for the future of this thing that we call the book. See, for 500 years or so, the copy has been central to our understanding of the book, or any text really, but especially the book. Today, we read as much or more on network screens, an activity that actively disrupts and almost negates any notion of the copy. So I guess this copy of my presentation on the future of the book has this as its first point. And I'm sorry, it's a bit of a well, duh kind of statement. But it's this. The digital and the physical world are not the same thing. Oh, sure. These worlds overlap and interact with each other all the time, and in increasingly sophisticated and interdependent ways. And I don't need to tell you that if you used Google Maps to get here today. Who you are online is an extension of who you are in the flesh, even if your online persona is very different. Maybe especially if your online persona is very different. But despite all this, the world of HTTP and the world of DNA are not the same thing. And this concept of the copy is a really good illustration. To create a print copy takes dedication, resources, time, and money. Even with modern home scanning and printing technology, no one wants to go through the interminable process of making their own copy of anything, be it Infinite Jest or 50 Shades of Grey, or Infinite Shades of Grey Jest. Yeah, let that one sink in. In a networked world, and in a networked digital world, things are very different. Although it's most certainly not a series of tubes, the internet is an excellent system for copying content. To view a single page of web content, a reader requests data from a remote server. This information is carved up into tiny packets which each wind their way through the network to reach the reader's computer, where everything is reassembled into something intelligible. Or maybe this. That. And this is why technology is awful. It's being awful to me. And my gag is dead. Just imagine that long pause didn't happen between, technology. I can leave that up for a little while if it's... Along the way, each packet of data passes through a series of routers, computers which not only direct internet traffic, but which also make copies of everything that passes through them. Though such copies are not held in perpetuity and represent only a fraction of something meaningful, they're still copies. And when the transmitted data is reassembled then into content on a viewer's screen, the web browser then automatically copies information from that page into a local cache on the reader's device. The cache holds that information in the event that the browser will want to return to that site in the future. Now, if that sounded really, really complicated, here's the Cliff Notes version. When you load up the front page of the New York Times website, unless it's your very first visit, you're compiling it from data that's already stored on your device alongside new stuff. Even the simple act of sending an email attachment results in a bloom of copies distributed across storage drives throughout the world. The act of attaching, the upload to an IMAP server, the transmission, and finally the download to the receiver creates a new and complete copy at each stage, at each juncture. And that's before we account for the fact that most of us now access our email on multiple devices. Each device needs its own copy. So this is a really long-winded way of saying that copying is essential to a functioning internet. It's a fact that feeds into a fundamental feature of digital media that actually began long before we had even come up with the concept of personal computing. To view something on a screen is to copy it on some level, whether overtly or covertly. And for a reader of online text, copying is as unconscious and as natural as breathing. So in regarding the future of the book, depending on who you are, that picture starts to look a little troubling. Many of the people and frequently the corporations who own the rights to digital creative media have applied the same rules to that electronic media as if it was still made of flattened wood pulp, glue and ink. It's a kind of denial, I guess, that reaches its apotheosis with DRM, the technology that artificially creates barriers to making a copy. It's technology that breaks technology, kind of like a free car immobiliser with every car sold. You never know when it's going to kick in. It's a way of thinking that applies beyond the protective rights holders too. As readers, we perceive the physical copy of a book as something with inherent value. Now, that value exists on two levels. Yeah, there's the value of the object itself. There's, the glue, the string, the ink, the paper. But then there's also the intellectual property that's contained within it, the ideas, the entertainment factor, the time that you spend with it. And the value of the latter is really masked by the former. Putting a price on a single intellectual property is nowhere near as easy as calculating the value of its container. After all, that container is made of stuff, right? And this is a real problem because a digital text exists independently of its container. A digital text consists of all those squidgy ideas and entertainment and time and none of the paper and the glue. So it leaves you with some hard questions. How do you put a price on an idea? What's it worth to you or to anyone? Broadly speaking, readers expect electronic texts to cost less than the physical ones because, it doesn't come with its own stuff. The stuff part is a device that we've already shelled out, maybe a couple of $100 for. So, if you think I'm going to spend another $20 on, Infinite Shades of Grey Jest, when I can get it packaged in its own stuff for, a couple of bucks extra, well, a lot of people choose the latter. For centuries, we've tied up the value of the intellectual property to the value of its container. And it's really, really hard to break out of that. And that's assuming that breaking out of it is something that you actually want to do. The battle cry of the internet pirates, information wants to be free, would seem to suggest otherwise. So, regardless of its container, the tricky value of an idea or a story remains the same, while in that transition from print to digital, the value of an individual copy of a story collapses to near zero. And we can see this playing out on the web, in comment streams, in bookstores, on BitTorrent, and of course in libraries. All of which is a really long-winded way of coming at the central idea that I have today, which is this. The current discussion around pricing, rights, ebooks, paywalls and piracy is not a discussion of the future of the book. The advent of networked digital media has untethered the book from its paper, and in response, the book is morphing and evolving in sometimes interesting and surprising ways. With IfBook, and increasingly in my own creative practice, that's the space I'm exploring. It's a space where texts are collaborated on and built using networking tools, where authors and readers interact with each other regardless of time and geography, and where the decision to bring words into the physical world is an aesthetic one. More importantly, it's a space where that central connection, what Stephen King calls the telepathy between author and reader, remains tangible and potent. At IfBook, we're creating stories that, regardless of their end product, could only be born from a digital environment. So I'm going to take you through one of those eventually. Hey, there we go. So on Monday, the 11th of June, 2012, at around 11 a.m, 9 writers, 10 editors, about a dozen support staff, 1 designer, a coffee machine, and a bucket load of Tim Tams came together with the purpose of creating a book. We were to begin working at midday. Like all books, we had a publishing deadline. Unlike a lot of books, our deadline was exactly 24 hours after we began. This was the 24-hour book. The writers, of which I was one, had been emailing each other for months leading up to the day and had come up with precisely 0 ideas in that time. But we had a lot of fun discussing exactly how terrified we all were. With 1 hour to kick off, we gathered in one room together. Hey, there we go. With 1 hour to kick off, we gathered together in one room. Eyeballing each other were Nick Earls, Stephen Amsterdam, Chrissy Neen, PM Newton, Christopher Curry, Rurik Davidson, Angela Slater, Jeff Lemon, and myself, along with our indefatigable and unflappable lead editor, Keith Stevenson. Now, this was a really quite experienced group, but one that contained wildly varied styles, approaches, and typical subject matter, from sci-fi to crime, from contemporary to erotica, from non-fiction to Nick Earls. We calmed ourselves by coming up with a process. We would each take a chapter. I might admit, this photo wasn't us preparing. We didn't break out the beer until a little bit later in the day, so just keep that in mind. We would each take a chapter. We would not attempt to mess with our own writing style or approach, but we would, where possible, use situations, images, characters, and themes across our stories. We would set the book here at the State Library of Queensland because that's where we were. And we would use a flood as the central event of the book. Bit obvious, really, isn't it? But it was also a kind of anchor to hold the book together, to keep everything going. There would be an object, a vase, that would feature in each chapter, and we would have a character, a librarian, who would drift through the entire book. We determined a rough kind of order by deciding who wanted to write before the flood, during the flood, and after the flood. Yeah, it kind of worked. As midday approached, someone decided that we should count down, and I can assure you this was not my idea. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. At precisely midday, the 11th of June, 2012, 5 writers went to the bathroom, 3 went to the kitchen, and 1 leaned back and stared up at the ceiling, mouth open. Incredibly, after this auspicious start, everyone did begin working, and words were in fact collected, a lot of words. To speed up the publishing process, we used an online tool called Pressbooks, and this had the dual advantage of enabling us to create print-ready and ebook files at the push of a button once we were finished. But it also meant that our work in progress would be freely available to read on the web. And Pressbooks had something else that would prove really quite valuable, a database. So Pressbooks is a variation of WordPress, which is, the popular blogging tool. WordPress users will know that when you compose a blog post, all the drafts of that post are saved in the site's database, and they're accessible so that you can backtrack any changes that you've made. Pressbooks does the same. Every time an author hits the save button, Pressbooks duly records a version of that story, a snapshot in its database. For the writers who chose to work in Pressbooks itself, rather than cutting and pasting from their own word processor, the system would not only save every revision of the story, but it would also perform ongoing autosaves of the work in progress. So we were able to capture a few authors at their least guarded. We established a communication system. As writers discovered people, places, events, and objects of significance, they would share these details with the rest of the group. As you can see, the system was highly technical and complex, but it allowed for time-shifted communication between the authors and their stories. And it also acted as a prompt for anyone seeking a bit of inspiration or maybe a bit of literary Drano. Somewhere around 7 p.m, we sent a harried email to the cover designer, Benjamin Portis, which read something like, "We're calling it Willow Pattern. It has a flood. We don't know what width the spine's going to be yet. We'll send you back cover blurb at some point. Good luck." Between 9 p.m. and 12:30 a.m, each chapter was completed by its author, handed briefly over to Keith and then passed over to one of the 9 line editors, postgraduate students from QUT's Creative Industries program. At 7 a.m, Keith and I, fresh and bushy-tailed from at least an hour's sleep, took the chapters back from the line editors, polished them further to the best of our abilities, and exported the entire book using Pressbooks' handy export button. And voila! Instant EPUB and print-ready PDF files. Thinking that was the end of it, some of the authors who had returned to watch the book's impending birth got ahead of themselves. At 11:30, I sent the cover image, which by this time did have a proper spine width, I might add, and the internal pages to Bronwyn Blaney from On Demand Books in New York City. Bronwyn was waiting patiently beside an espresso book machine, which you can see behind her. This was in the Brooklyn Public Library, which generously had agreed to stay open an hour later for us. At around 10 to 12, the first official copy of a book that did not exist 24 hours earlier rolled off a press on the other side of the planet. This one. But wait, I hear you say in your minds. That looks suspiciously like flattened wood pulp and glue and ink. Well, of course it does. Just because we're in the business of exploring the future doesn't mean we're automatically in the business of denying the past. Willow Pattern is available now across all ebook retail platforms and in bookstores throughout Australia. That aesthetic decision to go to print that I mentioned earlier, that's a decision on the part of the reader, not on the author and not of the publisher. But you're right to protest. This is just a book, But you didn't think we were going to leave it there, did you? One of IF Books' current projects is confusingly titled Willow Patterns. That's patterns, plural. This is an experiment designed to uncover some of the book's inner workings, to explore the creative and editing process, and to use the entirety of that collected data to inspire and drive new creative work. True remixes and responses that don't just riff off a finished article. It came about from the realisation that by the 12th of June 2012, we had created a database as close as we could get to the complete quantitative story of a single book's creation. Pressbooks allows you to export the database, but the database that it exports only includes the final text and the reader comments. For some reason, Pressbooks never considered that anyone would want to extract every version of every chapter. What's up with that? You mean we're using tools in a way that was never intended by their designers? It's crazy talk. Cracking open the Pressbooks database actually turned out to be one of the most complicated things that we had embarked on. It took about 6 months to complete. But by the end, we had a shiny SQL file that unfortunately I had no way to open or inspect. So we turned that file over to IceLab, a design and data and design studio who built a wonderful and glorious website that allows anyone to browse through every version of the text, download data sets, and also establishes an API, an application programming interface, that leaves open the possibility that anyone with a little bit of coding skill can readily tap into that data and create visualizations or apps or whatever they fancy. If you want to check it out, it's at willowpatterns.net. The purpose of this database is not just to interrogate the workflow of 9 writers and 10 editors, although we've gleaned quite a few fascinating insights from that process. Instead, we're more interested in generating new creative responses and remixes of that data. To demonstrate, an obvious starting point is word frequency. Working off the final text, the top 10 most frequent words in the book is actually a pretty uninspiring bunch. It's all articles and prepositions. Bloody English. But after 100 or so entries, the list starts to broaden out to include nouns that are not just pronouns or proper nouns, and further down again to verbs and modifiers. And strange coincidences happen in the coupled words that all throughout this list, and they remain a testament to the human ability to find patterns in the random. But one of my favourite word frequency activities is to construct automated poetry from the list. So take a list of words like this, and you have word frequency in alphabetical order. We've got a bunch of words that all appeared 9 times in the text. However, take the same words and present it this way, and hey, Ern Malley, eat your heart out. All right, so questionable poetry is, hardly a worthwhile outcome. But that's why we have approached actual certified poets with talent, including Nathan Curnow, Nicholas Powell, and Pascal Burton. We're inviting them to stare deeply into the data and do their own interpretations, remixes, and mashups, and to transform the data. And in this sense, we're remixing in the purest sense. We're working with that entire text, including all the discarded stuff. And in addition, we have a dedicated team of students from QUT. They too are interrogating the data, and they're forming their own responses, both academic and creative, from the experience. And what we hope to build from this activity is a kind of installation that takes readers way beyond 150 pages of finished text and into a world where the book, that newly untethered vehicle for the telepathic connection between people, becomes a starting point for discussion, for collaboration, extension, and further creativity. You might call it juxtaposed ideas, distorted and transformed in the process to something new. No 2 worlds would look exactly the same. And that's exactly as it should be, because for my money, the future of the book is something that defies copying. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Simon.
No problem.
We're going to have a bit of a conversation now for 10 minutes or so. I can get the ball rolling, or I can get to the audience. Has anyone got a question? We've got microphones on, I think, both ends of both aisles. Has anyone got a question? I mean, maybe I'll kick off. Oh, there is a question. Great. On the front here. The gentleman there. Thank you.
I'm interested to know if the API, is it, that you set up allows readers to rewrite the book from their own story with their own characters, and if it does, or I suppose even if it doesn't, how does this play into the issue of intellectual property rights?
Right. It's a good question. The openness of the project is something that was built in right from the beginning. All the authors knew that their work was going online, that it would be accessible and would almost be accessible in perpetuity. So it came with the expectation that readers could transform the work and do whatever they liked with it. including using it as a launch to retell the story or bring in your own characters. Given that it's the work of 9 incredibly diverse writers, I challenge you to be able to tell a continuous story from start to finish. It's slightly more, it's continuous in a kind of sense. But no, that's completely built into that project. And it's built into a lot of the projects that we do. We do that with a very clear eye. And it's something we're very conscious of when we approach writers. When we commission new work, to be very clear about where the boundaries are of what we're buying from them, essentially. One of the problems with the way traditional publishing has approached intellectual property is what's called the all rights reserved. So when we buy it, we get everything, and we hang on to it for a period of time. That's not necessarily the only way anymore, and that's part of what we try to demonstrate through our projects. And sometimes sometimes the authors prefer to have the work remain in their control and their property, and we allow that to happen. But a lot of times writers are pretty open about it. You know, as long as you're upfront with them right from the get-go. As far as I know, like Chrissy, for example, she's vowed that she's not even going to read it, let alone reuse it. So, it's... I think it's an important issue, and it's one that we try and address more by demonstration than by talking about it.
So, Simon, it challenges the idea of authorship, doesn't it?
Well, I think, the whole concept of active reading and the expectation that is set up in, say, something like a blog that is, responses from readers is built into that system.
Yeah.
That's becoming very much a normal thing.
But when the response is not just a response, but a reshaping of the actual original text.
Yeah.
That's a different thing again, because then you can't separate the response from the original text.
Yeah.
And then you're left with the question, whose text is this? Who's
Exactly.
written this text?
Exactly. And I'm really excited. One of the... we've been tossing a lot of ideas back and forth with the poets who are looking at it at the moment. And one of them is specifically looking at attribution and is going to build a piece around attribution. So we're going to, depending on how it goes, we've still got a little way to go before we get to a final product, but we've been talking about this idea of pushing attribution to its absolute extreme.
Yeah. It is to the book what sampling is to hip-hop music, creating new music through taking other people's work and reshaping it. And of course that was and continues to be a threat to this notion of intellectual property, doesn't it?
It's really tricky because, it's perfectly okay to take someone's work and use that as inspiration and work off that and recreate it. It's perfectly okay to rewrite someone else's work in your own way, because you can show that your own creativity is in there and you have transformed the work in the process, and you've created an independent work. But there's a sliding scale between that and picking up somebody else's words in toto and slapping your name on it, which clearly is wrong.
Yeah.
There's no clear line between those two things. It's a sliding scale. So it's an area that we're always thinking about, we're always conscious of, and in some ways, we explore in our own little weird creative way.
Sorry, it's an occupational hazard of mine to ask questions when I should be getting some questions from the audience. Let's hear from some others if we do have other questions. Anyone?
I've beaten everyone into submission.
I guess it's not so much a question as just continuing on what you were just talking about. And I think it's trying to find a balance in how you're communicating with people. So the traditional view is, I've spent all this time to write down this perfect thing that then I want to give to other people, and they will have that. But then there's the whole idea of the conversational theory of learning, that people learn through conversation, not necessarily even with others, but with yourself. So while you're reading, you're saying, do I agree with this? What does this mean? But you don't have the ability to actually ask those questions to a book, to this artifact that
Yeah.
someone has written down. So it's taking that experience and actually making it available to, instead of being an artifact, be a conversation.
Yeah, and that's a really big part of what we are trying to explore. And in some ways, the print book is not shut out from that process entirely. It's another way that readers are accessing the text. And like I was saying, I mean, it's the reader's choice to how they want to consume a text. And I mean, we were just talking the other day about how at the moment it's very difficult to jump across different media. You know, if I buy a print copy of something, why can't I also have a digital copy so that if I get spare time, I can just pick up where I left off, or even audiobooks, or you know. But you know, potentially that ability is not hard to do. So you know, presumably at some point that we'll have the ability to do that. But the being able to absorb a text in a sort of passive way. I mean, you're not really passive when you're reading, but certainly you can't talk back to the author. But I think that's where things like social media step in, because readers do interact with writers on social media, and there is an expectation, depending on the writer, that the writer will respond and engage and talk. And a lot of writers are really awesome at that. They're really, really good and conduct really interesting conversations back and forth.
Time for one more quick question.
I was taken by something you said right at the beginning about valuing the containerless content. It made me think about when I bought my first generation iPod, and I was so excited to listen to music on it. And it was like it was the same thing. It was still music, but it was experienced in a totally different way because of the device. Like
Yeah.
It was so exciting, and I don't think I experienced that with EPUB or reading a PDF on an iPad. And I wonder if you had any thoughts about whether it's the device or the presentation or something which is a bit of a barrier.
I don't know. I mean, there's probably an element of horses for courses. Certainly, you know, your average dedicated e-reader is not a fabulous piece of technology. You know, the early Kindles, we used to compare that to it looked like a bit off an old air conditioner that had broken off or something. Like, they were the ugliest things in the world. And the really slick and sexy e-readers are not just e-readers at all. They're complete devices that, you know, that are constantly interrupting you, you know. So it's a bit muddied, I think. It's a little bit more muddied. And there hasn't... I mean, the Kindle, I think, has been the closest thing that we've had to the iPod. But it's coming from a different place, a different design aesthetic, and there's a sort of different process happening there. I don't know. I mean, I had that iPod experience as well. I had, I think, a third gen iPod, which I loved. I would still have it if somebody hadn't flogged it.
It's a good point, though, isn't it, that the iPod was a beautiful device, and people who read covet books in hardcover form because they're often beautiful, but nothing has replaced that beauty in a technological form, for books anyway, whereas it has for other devices.
Potentially. But although, like I say, you know, we have beautiful devices, but the people who are making the beautiful devices are not thinking about dedicated e-readers.
No,
that's like a totally...
True.
That's
Yeah.
not in their ethos or their market at all. Also, I think with music, we've gone from we've gone sort of from print to digital. For a lot of people, that's been the experience, without a sort of middle step. With music, there was a long process. We sort of went from vinyl records, which have all of the nostalgia and the coolness factor, and all of that has been retained from vinyl, from the 1980s and earlier. And then we moved to CDs, which it's now that CD has been so cheap and nasty and horrible, you kind of forget how delightful they were. I remember the first CD I bought. I bought it before I had a CD player. Yeah, I'm that kind of guy. Sit there looking at it. But that crystal clear sound, it was a leap. But then I suspect maybe the advent of CDRs kind of cheapened it, and it became disposable. And so the media on which you're listening to the music became, it's just stuff. And not nice stuff.
It's true.
It's stuff that you just sort of stick in, you put away, And that started even before iPods. You would listen to iTunes, or well, maybe you didn't, but I did. But I had an iTunes library before I had an iPod, and you would rip a CD, put the CD away, and never look at it again. There wasn't that same slow transition with books, and I don't know that makes a difference, but I kind of suspect that it does. It's not much of an answer. I'm sorry.
Okay, we'll have to wrap it. There is more time for questions at the very end of the three presentations today, so perhaps we can pick up on some of Simon's stuff there. There's plenty to talk about, but would you please thank Simon Groth? Actually, that kept reminding me of Marshall McLuhan, the medium is the message, that technology shapes the content. Okay, next up we have a presentation entitled Does Digital Change the Library Model by Jane Cowell. Jane is Director of Regional Access and Public Libraries at the State Library of Queensland. Her key projects at the library have been, during her appointment, the Library Leadership Program for public library staff, the State Library's Literacy Framework, Libraries for Literacy Every Day, Every Way, and the Library Dividend, the socio-economic value of Queensland public libraries. Prior to this role, Jane was a senior consultant with the AEC Group, working with local governments and state libraries across Australia on strategic planning, library service models and community consultation in the areas of library and community services. Jane has 20 years public library management experience, including serving as the President of the Queensland Public Library Association. Please make Jane welcome.
Now let's hope the technology works for me. So, does digital change the library model? So we are changing. Libraries are moving from a model that curates a collection of stuff for a consumer of stuff to a model that provides a creative experience. So we're moving from just that consuming to experiencing stuff. So libraries are doing this in a myriad of ways. They're adding learning opportunities, they're adding debating opportunities, they're adding actual creating opportunities. So there's a way, even if it's a way of making a quilt, there's making spaces in libraries. There's a place to make stuff with people or by yourself. And we're actually facilitating that making. So we are changing. And what does this mean in the digital world? What are the humans' drivers? What do we want? Well, we have the same needs we've always had. We want to feel connected. We want to feel as if we belong. We want to access content that interests us, that interests them, that sort of connects us to the things that we like. And traditionally, librarians have helped us. See also. I love it. The librarians see also component. You might also like this, this, and this. But we also want to connect to our place where we live. whether it's the events that happen on around us, whether it's meeting people of like interest around us, but we want to connect to our place. So if there is a digital library, how does a digital library do that? Well, at SLQ we decided to ask the question. So in our digital library project we asked quite a lot, and the one question that I got to ask was what could the experience of a public library be in a digital space? Now, it was called Digital Library Project 5, which is pretty boring, but that's what we called it. But what did we do? Well, we went out and we asked people. We asked state library staff, we asked authors, we asked publishers, we asked videographers, we asked library users, we asked regional libraries, we asked business, they're getting younger every year, and we asked technologists. So we asked people who created stuff, we asked people who consume stuff, we asked people who organise stuff. And what did they want, you know, sort of in a digital world? What did they think of it? What would a digital library be? So what did we learn? Well, and we work quite closely with the Queensland Writers' Centre as well, and they gave us, you know, quite a lot of information. So if in 2011 there were 7,600 to 10,000 book authors in Australia, and close to over 3,000 claimed that writing was their primary occupation. So we have creators, we have authors, we have writers, and they can do it in 24 hours, according to Simon. 17% of Australians actively engage with writing as writers. Now, this could be short-form writing as blogs, this could be, you know, long-form writing, but they engage with writing. 80% of Australians read, and isn't that fantastic? Reading and writing are the most popular arts activities in Queensland, and 84% of Queenslanders either read or write forms of creative writing. So we're in a good place if we're libraries and if you're a writer. Oops. So no, back one. Oh, we're having your problem, Simon. So digital audiences, are there digital audiences out there? Well, ebook sales in Australia has increased from less than 5 million in 2005 to over 20 million in 2010. So even though they might not be beautiful, Paul, we are using them. So we're definitely buying e-content. 4 in 5 Australians have access to an internet connection at home. So if we've got access to an internet connection at home, how are libraries reaching us? Libraries are expecting you to come to visit our place. We don't provide good enough parking in some cases, but we're expecting you to come to our house. But how can we reach you in your house if we're not digital? Literary event audiences make above average use of the internet. So those people who do read, who engage in reading, who engage in long-form reading, really use the internet a lot. They show the greatest tendency to own a smartphone, and demonstrate really savvy use of the internet. So do we as libraries meet those needs of those literary audiences? Do we even engage in that way? From the author perspective, did I jump one again? Hybrid authors outsold and out-earned their traditionally published, self-published colleagues. So that's people who published across an e-platform as well as a traditional platform. So they out-earned the traditional published authors. So do you think if they out-earned them that they're going to stop doing that? That they're going to stop doing it in the digital world and let the reader decide how they'll consume that content? Their main publishing priorities are distribution and creative control. So how do I reach my audience, but also how do I maintain my intellectual property? So there is that worry for them. And digital technology affects every stage of the book production, as Simon demonstrated, from the creative development to the distribution and discovery. So in terms of that, in terms of reading, what does that mean for the digital library? Let's see if I can do 2 again. So, from a reader perspective, when we talk to readers about their use of an experience of the library offer in the digital space, what was it? Well, it's an ever-increasing number of e-lenders and or aggregators. It's not all on one platform, it's a number. Access and usage is fragmented and confusing to us, is what they told us. So, and we asked young people, we asked 60-year-old book club users who had iPads and engaged digitally. We asked a range of people and how they engaged with libraries, and they might have only come to book the internet, but they find it fragmented and confusing. Are we listening to them? And membership is restricted. I actually can't use the Mackay Library because I live on the Sunshine Coast. But the Mackay Library has that ebook that I want because it's come up. So there's quite a lot of restrictions that readers don't understand why. And they don't see why it's true in the digital space because it's not true when they actually use the internet. So, and this is a model of libraries that people don't understand because they're funded by local taxes. So therefore they're delivered to local people. But in the digital space, that model doesn't quite work. Users expect e-content to be accessible and viewable on any or all of the marketing-leading e-reader devices. So we provide a lending platform that only allows you to access it on an Apple product and not a Kindle product. The user is confused. They've got an e-reader. They bought the cheap one from the $2 shop. So they expect to be able to use it on that reader. They want one sign-in, not 18. So for all the social interaction and amalgamating, and they also want to have their own book library integrated. They don't see why I can't see what I've got as opposed to what you've got, as opposed to what I'm lending. You might say, well, gee, that's unreasonable. How are you going to do that? But the question is, I'm just saying this is what we learnt from the reader. This is an expectation from the reader. And they expect access no matter where they are geographically located. So all of this has implications for copyright licenses. It has implications for the models that we currently use. So why does Australia is the most pirating nation of the world? Because the world says, Australia, you have to wait. It's not coming to you for 3 months. So if I want to watch the next episode of Homeland, for example, I've got to wait because you're not going to give it to me. Well, I want it now. Why can't I go to McDonald's. I use instant coffee. I want it now. So I pirate it because I can. And that's the issue of, in the digital world, a copy is a copy and is obtainable. So don't tell me I have to wait. It was interesting, there was a huge debate on Triple J around young people pirating music. And all of the people who rang in said, well, I tried to buy it first and it told me I couldn't have it. So I stole it. Because why should it tell me I couldn't have it? But they all tried to buy it first. So it was interesting that they only pirated it because they told they couldn't have it yet. So that geographic licence we really need to work on. So then what did State Library do with that knowledge? What did we actually then think about? Well, what would we create? Well, we went out and we designed a concept. Now, I want to state up front, we didn't build it. It's a concept, it's an idea. We actually illustrated the design around literature, but it could be the same for any format because, of course, libraries are content agnostic. we loan anything. And we named it Alice. Alice is not an acronym for anything. It's because I decided I was in Wonderland and I didn't know whether I was at a Mad Hatter's Tea Party or the Queen of Hearts, which would be the State Librarian, was going to chop off my head. So this is Alice. So it is an all-in-one resource to discover, borrow, buy and publish literature online. So this is about being in a space, in a digital space, which encourages creation, which encourages engagement with the creator and with the product. So you could mix it up and mash it up. It can be short form, it can be long form, it doesn't matter what form, but it is shareable and it is able to be engaged with. It is very social, so there is a whole connection there, and you can sign on with whatever else you've got to sign in. Don't ask me how, I'm not the tech geek, they tell me it's possible. So I can sign in with whatever social media I have. I can also add all of my other library stuff. So my social reading sources would be engaged. So my Goodreads, I don't have to create another one. My Small Demons, my Trove searches where my newspaper stuff will come up. My independent publishing likes, or if I didn't even know about independent publishing but like some content, it will show me. So all of these other stuff that wouldn't necessarily come up first in a Google search because they didn't even know it existed would be in Alice. So how does it connect me to place? So this is Alice. You have, I don't have a pointer, but you have a library bag, you have an activity space, you have reading lists that you can create. So that's my holiday reading list. I've got this, I'm an author, this is my published list. But it also connects me to place. It knows where I live, or it knows where I am at this moment, and it tells me, so this is built, Alice, the design concept, is built around Jane Bailey, who's a grade 3 teacher who loves reading, and she lives at Noosa. So it tells her that there is a Noosa Regional Library. So I could be in Townsville and tell me that it's a Townsville Regional Library. So it's an amalgamation of content. It curates it based around my preferences and who I am. It doesn't bring everything up, but it recommends stuff for me. It also connects me to my friends and imports a social feed around people who like what I like, who are reading what I read, and I can connect to them because possibly I might like them if they read what I like. It gives me quite a lot of recommendations based on my reading list, based on my preferences, and it'll build up a preference profile for me that will bring into content and choices. In terms of borrowing, loaning, buying, renting, it didn't matter in terms of Alice. We offered in the design concept all of those opportunities. If I wanted a physical copy, it's brought in the physical copy because it's available at my local library, and Alice will take me out into my local library. All of this can only happen with open APIs, and yes, library management systems are moving to that. They're not quite there yet, but they will move to it. This is the digital library of the future. So it's pulled in that I didn't even know my local library had it. I didn't have to go into my local library to search it. But it brought it up because it was on my reading list and it's available in the physical copy. I have a choice in the one spot. I can borrow it online for free for 7 days because the author said I could. Yes, we have to work out a public library lending copy funding to the author, but yeah, that'll come. Let's think about the model. But this is what I want as a reader. Or I can rent it because in actual fact 7 days is too short. And the author said I can have it for 7 days for free, but gee, I can rent it for $1 for 30 days. Or I can go straight to the author's website and buy it because in actual fact it's a beautiful thing, I want it, I've read it for 2 days and I want it. So I can do that. And I can talk to my friends about it as I'm reading it. No, we're not going anywhere. There. So it'll also connect me to place. So it will tell me when events that I might be interested in, remember that it's an aggregator. Yes, I know the search algorithm will be hard, but Google does it. We can do it. If Google is working on the answer to my question, what am I doing tomorrow, then we can do it. So it brings in those events that I might like to connect with locally, things that are happening from any of the websites around. Again, you can see that I'm still talking to people. I'm still connected to people. It's not about find. It's about explore. You don't have to know exactly what you're after. You have an idea? Just start typing and results will appear. So I might be interested in Tim Winton. I don't know how to spell it. But what will come up is some titles, some publishers, because I can explore. I can go out and explore. I can explore self-published authors that start with Win, so it might be Tim Winterbottom. I can explore lists, so I can explore people who have Tim Winton on their lists and see if I like their lists and connect with them. But I can also do the see also. You like Tim Winton, he writes about Western Australia, you might like to know about topics of Western Australia, add it. You might like to know about surfing, add it. So it really creates the see also. So you don't have to know what you're looking for, but you want to explore. And that's that serendipity that Small Demons does really well, that Simon was telling me about and that I was exploring last night. It also allows for a lot of that personalised discovery. So I'm a fan of Tim Winton. As an author, Tim Winton's got a page on Alice. It brings in all of his content from his web page, from his Facebook page. He doesn't have to duplicate it, it amalgamates it. And I can actually interact with Tim quite easily. Again, the interaction in Alice it's about you. It's a totally personalised discovery, totally personalised borrowing history, and you receive personally tailored content. So Alice is your personal librarian. I was told I should have created her as an avatar and have her as a holograph. So that's my next step. But it is getting instant access to that latest news about your creator. And this could be a videographer, it could be a film producer. This is a concept around a creator. And while we didn't actually illustrate the publish it yourself component, the publish it yourself component will actually amalgamate trusted sources of help for authors. So it will actually amalgamate. So you're interested in finding an editor. Because while the big gateway of publishers have gone, you still need the publishing help of editor, illustrator, sort of around those. So it will connect you to those. It will display existing author contact services that are all there, so it'll amalgamate it from trusted services. It will create a profile of you as the creator from your website, Twitter and Facebook, as I've said. And you'll also be able to view in real time the statistics of people using your content. So from an author, you can see that people in Townsville really like what you've done. You might engage with that fan base around, look, I've got 3 different endings for this story, which one do you like? There's a way of interacting with your audience that wasn't there before. You can explore and share within that. As a publisher, as a person, as a creator, you can share your work within a personalised or public space. So say you've created your family history, and you want to share it with only 50 people of people who'd be interested in your family history, you can. You can make it public. Say you're the Neighbourhood Watch and you've created your e-newsletter and place it on Alice. It will put it under the notice of people who live within your Neighbourhood Watch area, because guess what? Alice knows where you live. The person can click or not click, but it'll come up because you might be interested in this, because this is about where you live. The short form, it doesn't matter, as I said. You might be a writer of leadership articles. You might pull them together as a content and give them to the people that you present it to. So there's a whole way of sharing as the publisher. So what does this mean as a model? So it is global members with a local connection. It does actually put pressure on the way we fund libraries. Because who's going to build Alice? Because anyone can join it. That's the whole purpose, is that anyone can join it at any time, and you've got a very wide distribution. It's very much personalised. So through technology, it's about you. Why do people engage in Facebook? No, it's not just about moaning about their day, because Facebook is about you. It's about me. Why do you engage in Twitter? You know, it is about learning, but it's also about me. And it's about contacting my preference, my people, in different ways. It puts a lot of pressure on copyright laws and licensing laws. How do we work about that? I don't know the answers to these questions. I'm just telling you what people want. It must have social interaction built in. It must have the ability to talk to people, to talk to like people. It needs to enable really strong connections between users and creators, and sort of actually allow that talking easily. And it needs to be easy to join. So in terms of that, that's what a digital public library could be. But is it really a new model? I don't know. Does it actually put pressure on us? Because why would Noosa Public Library get involved? Where does their logo live? Where does State Library Queensland's logo live? Where does the author's logo live? It doesn't have to be there if it's about you, the user, or you, the creator, because the logo is you. And Alice will connect you to those other places which you didn't know exist. When I talk to people who don't use libraries, they want Alice because they said, oh my God, I have my own personal librarian. I have my own personal recommendations. This is Goodreads on steroids. But why don't you go to the library then? Oh, there's no parking. It's not open at 11 p.m. That's the only time I have. There's a whole lot of barriers to them going to the physical library. But in the digital sense, they could get it here. And they go to the library when they need to. Some didn't even know they had a library in their area. So this would be a way of connecting to a library, connecting into the creative space or the helpful space when they need to. Thank you.
We are a bit over time, but we had half an hour for morning tea penciled in, so I reckon if we squash that down to 20 minutes, say, have 5 minutes of questions. Anyone object to that idea? Let's just go straight to some questions anyway. Can we take the lady in the middle there who was going to ask a question earlier, but we didn't have time, so we'll give her priority. Just patiently pass the microphone across.
Libraries in Australia have been the most collaborative in the entire world. We have Libraries Australia and Trove, which is probably one of the world's best search engines. Why don't we just develop that? All of us abandon our local systems and work through that. It can easily do almost all of the things you suggest. It's got APIs, everything already.
I actually think it puts us in a better purchasing position, because in Australia you've got 11.5 million library users. If you went to any, as a distribution source, that's an amazing distribution and reach that we can have if we work together, sort of all together, and abandon, as you say, our own empire, because some people have little empires.
I know it's probably like getting rid of local, state and federal government all in one, and one hesitates, but we could do it if we had the will to do it.
And do we?
Okay, next question.
I've stunned them all, Paul.
Why do we need bricks and mortar libraries if Alice takes off?
I actually think that libraries do, if they're maker spaces and creative spaces, I think they do different things. So, you know, sort of, while you exist to engage with content or information in the online world, I think in the physical space, there's quite a lot of other things happening. So one of the key things that's happened is we have a mobile workforce. A lot of people come to the physical spaces to work. A lot of people come to the physical spaces, if you're a young mum, you know, sort of bring your children to story time for that meeting and greeting and in social aspect. Another person might come simply to write their letters because they want to feel as part of people. We still have a public space to meet that is, and I'd hate to see that civic space go and the only thing left be shopping centres. Do we really want the only things that public can actually gather and exist together as our young people, anyone, as a shopping centre? No. Thank you.
I was fishing for that answer, so that's very good. It's like the digital book doesn't replace entirely the hardcover book in the same way that the digital library doesn't replace the bricks and mortar library. They sort of overlap. I think everyone is a bit stunned. I'll give you one more chance. Oh, here we go. Great. Actually, can we take the woman at the back who hasn't asked a question yet? Sorry about that. Let's be democratic about this. Thanks.
Just wondering, you were saying that 4 out of 5 Australians already have internet access. The problem with going for something like this is they might have internet access but not necessarily broadband. You also still have 20% of the population who actually are the ones that we need to get into libraries because they need access and they need to be taught how to do it. So is that where we need to fit in with Alice? Because a lot of it is not going to be accessible for people who don't have good enough connections.
One of the key things that State Library's done is create a vision for public libraries of the future, and that's a key thing, is creative spaces, connecting spaces, but also technology trendsetters. So in fact, the physical space of the library is to connect people with the new technology and engage them with it. So it's a key theme for our Vision 2017. So absolutely, there will always be new technology and libraries are the place to actually connect with it. In Queensland, you know, sort of go an hour west and you're going to have difficulty with internet. But remember, I'm in Wonderland there. So, and in Wonderland, I have the NBN everywhere.
Okay, we can take a very quick question or comment, and then we'll retire for morning tea.
I think it's a great, broad, inspiring idea, but I think it also assumes a captive audience. So I was really seeing, you know, Google, where Google has Google Books or Google Music, all these different things that you can do with it, but it was built on having a great search engine that became part of people's everyday lives, and that's how they were able to add all these other things in, because they had that captive audience. So I guess then my question is Alice built on one core service? Is it where, like you said, Goodreads on steroids? Are we trying to take this traditional lending service and using Alice make that become part of everyone's everyday, and then add in, you know, IMDb on steroids and the news on steroids and all these other things to have a new central place that people visit?
Well, obviously, the libraries want to take over the world. I think, you know, sort of world domination is our aim. I think in terms of that, the model is that libraries are an amalgamation and helping personalised discovery. So yes, it might be IMDb on steroids. I don't think IMDb does it very well in actual fact. But, you know, sort of it's the model isn't about that I go into a closed curated collection that is curated, you know, sort of for me, that I only have access to that. Because publishing is so broad now, because information is so broad, that the model of Alice would be to amalgamate existing content out there based on you, so to make some sense of the vast array of offer, you know, sort of around you. And that's what librarians, you know, sort of do in their model, is that they help navigate a vast array of information. Now, Google does it initially for us anyway, but to amalgamate content and access to content. So how do I find that next blog? Do I come across it serendipitously? You know, currently you have a publisher who's the gatekeeper of what's published, but if that gatekeeper of publishing goes, how do... You're talking to a person who is afraid that they won't find the next really good book. So how do I want help with that? You know, sort of I want to know what that is. And yes, it can be sci-fi, it can be paranormal romance, it can be, you know, sort of a saga, it can be noir, you know, sort of fiction. It can be the next adventure, true life story. What is the next thing that I might want to read based on my personalised discovery? Because I don't want crap.
And I think another important part of that is, even if you have all these things that Alice could do to let people customize what they want from it, because that was what made, you know, the App Store so popular, is because you know, a smartphone is a really complicated device that can do all sorts of things, but if it came preloaded with everything, people would be overwhelmed. But having the ability to say, well, I'm interested in music, so I'm going to add these 5 apps in, and that's what my phone is going to be about. Having that built in as well helps people actually make it usable in their everyday.
I'm going to take that as a comment, actually, and I think we should wrap it up because we are starting to drift, and it's like an avalanche. You don't stop it. Jane, fantastic talk. Will you please thank Jane Cowell? Okay, we're going to have some morning tea out on the terrace. After the terrace, Eli's going to, I think, continue on a bit more with that discussion about the future of the bricks and mortar library, what it might look like. There'll be some surveys handed out as well while you're out there having morning tea, so please cooperate with that, and we'll see you back here soon.